Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for giving up your afternoon when everybody's herring out and going off on a public holiday tomorrow. It's unusual having a public holiday on a Wednesday, so people are less encouraged to view that as an exceptionally long weekend. But we did decide to go ahead and have a session this week because it does fit in with our 3-part session on fostering a growth mindset. So just so that you can give some feedback to me, let's begin with this, and also so that you get it on your device. Either open another tab in your browser or use a phone or a tablet. And I'm going to ask you to log into the website polev.com / Shiramach, all one word, but with 2 R's, don't forget. And it's 8:30. Okay, so log in there. And hopefully the question will come up on the screen. I want to know if this is the first time you're joining the Mindset Talk, so then you hit the top one, the second time, or the third time. So have you been to all 3? Have you been to just one? Have you been to a couple? Great. I got an answer. That's useful. So what that really means to me is that so far half of you have been to the previous 2, and some have been to 1, and some have been to none. I see we've got our groupies in the room, right? Thanks, Christine, for dropping the link in the chat. Okay, that's very useful for me to know. So let's do a little bit of then moving into something useful. And let's say slideshow on current slide. Okay. So in the first session, we really introduced the concept of a growth mindset and spoke about how one really adjudicates the responses of people in the moment as to whether they're exhibiting a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. Then we spoke about in the second session activities that we could do that would promote growth mindset in our students. And we did develop a Padlet, and that Padlet is still up and available. So if you have any grand ideas, please add them, and we'll start using it as a resource to try and help people to get ideas and to develop growth mindset approaches when they design their learning activities. So for the third one, I wanted to speak a little bit about process. So talking about the kinds of thinking and wording that we can use that will help people. And many of us as teachers are in a leadership role, because if you're the facilitator in the group, you're leading the group. Although people do say that you need to allow the group to norm, storm, and form, right? But you're still supplying the boundaries for what's going to happen in the group. And so I would argue that all of us occupy a leadership role. And so are there things that we could do from a growth mindset perspective that help people to achieve what they need to achieve? And I called this shifting focus from title to purpose. Because if we say, I want you to learn about benzodiazepines, it really shuts down what the student's going to do, because they'll go to the textbook perhaps, they'll look up what is this name, they'll read a little bit about it, and they'll think that they've done the task. Whereas if I say, we're learning about medicines that can calm people down when they're very anxious, or if we say we're learning about medicines that some people use to help them sleep, so immediately that gives them much more purpose and motivation in what it is they're going to do, because they realize the utility of the thing. So in other words, it gives them more motivation to approach the challenge and to make the effort, which are those things that we're all very excited about with regard to growth mindset. Oops, it's interesting that it doesn't come through straight away. So I'll give you a minute to have a look at the quote. And I'm quoting here a very, very, very famous guy called Viktor Frankl. He was a psychiatrist who survived the Second World War. And he wrote a book called The Will to Meaning. Well, he's written many, many, many books, but the one that most people quote is The Will to Meaning. And he says, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And that space there. And in that space lies our power to choose our response. He said that that was the man's biggest freedom. So in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And I think that actually the world's problems are solved by this. In that, if we take the time, so we don't give a knee-jerk response. Uh, in other words, if we develop some mindfulness about our actions, which we spoke about as being the very first step in developing a growth mindset, was building awareness of who we are, and what we're doing. So if we have that awareness, then all the stimuli, whatever they are, elicit a thoughtful response. And in this space, we're allowed then, if you want to use neurobiological terms, to develop the plasticity to choose the growth mindset response. So even if our knee jerk is, oh, I haven't got any energy and I'm not going to do this, take a breath, have a moment, think about the purpose of what it is that you want to do, and then think about a whole lot of things, the outcomes that you'd like, the energy you have to put in, and make a judgment as to whether your chosen response is the response that you want to give. And likewise, we can sensitize our students to do that, because I think students tend to be pretty unthinking. We give them tasks and they do the task, and often they try and do it as fast as possible, and often they do it to tick it off or to get a signature, and they're not actually thinking about their entire life, and their entire life is actually in this space, because the more you practice responses which exhibit a growth mindset, the more chance you have of exhibiting that growth mindset as you develop. I mean, going completely forward. Okay. Oh gosh, you have to be on the right screen to be able to get back to where you want to be. All right, so I hope you're still logged in to Pal Everywhere, because the next question I want to ask you speaks to this, which is a recap. So for those of you who've been here before, let's think about the categories which people delineate, help you exhibit a growth mindset. So I've already spoken about challenges, for example, but right at the beginning, we spoke about 5 categories, really, which help us delineate how people are responding in that space. So stay logged in to the polev.com. And it's open text, so you can just add a word. Okay, there we go, purpose. Certainly helps students to develop that mindset. You're anonymous, by the way. I didn't make you have to tag who you are. Yeah, okay, sense of humor is cute. Yeah, definitely being able to reflect. These are all great. Yeah. So awareness and acceptance of mistakes, I would go with that quite far. And persistence is certainly um, so far I have 5 out of 14 responses. Does that mean you're just having problems logging into the poll everywhere, or you're having problems engaging with the idea? And you can drop your problem in the chat if you're really struggling with it. So Matty, yeah, it is a difficult question, which I didn't really know how to ask. So perhaps you're right. Perhaps the growth mindset approach is to say one of the problems why people aren't answering is because they didn't know what I meant. So let's do a 1-minute recap. And that's to say, the categories that show us that people are developing a growth mindset, where you get continued plasticity to the point where somebody is choosing that mindset as a first choice in their space, speaks to our approach to the actual challenge. So the 5 of you who rose to the challenge and wrote an answer are exhibiting more of a growth mindset than those who were scared of putting something up and being wrong. Because that's a fixed mindset approach to say, I can't say anything because I may be wrong. Understanding also that your responses are anonymous, so I can only tell you numbers of who responded. I can't say who it was. So embrace the challenge. That's the first point. Secondly, don't give up if there are obstacles along the way, because there are actually always obstacles along the way. So it's being persistent in the face of setbacks, and here we have that. Seeing effort as a path to mastery. So if you put in huge amounts of effort in the direction that effort is going to help you, then that is definitely the path to mastery. So in other words, there are no quick fixes. You can't say, I'm going to be brilliant at doing this clinical skill if you don't practice it. Yes, I like your upvoting. So people who are choosing which ones they like. The fourth category, if you like, is how you deal with criticism. So if you got offended that I said that you had a more fixed mindset because you didn't respond, and you immediately log off the call and you don't want to listen to any more, so then I would say that you're exhibiting a fixed mindset, because there you're ignoring useful feedback and you don't want to engage anymore because of how you think I'm judging you in a way. It's a really, really hard thing to tune out your self voice and to engage with criticism, even if it's negative. So, for example, a journal reviewer sends you back a review that shows clearly they don't understand the paper that you've written. And you just get furious with it and you say, I'm not sending it anywhere else because they just don't understand what I'm doing. Um, that's not the approach. So the approach would be, I understand that they're criticizing my paper. Maybe there is something of value in their criticism. And it's always nice to hear another voice, even if you put it in the drawer for 2 days and calm down before you take it out again and engage with it. And then one of the last categories, which I really think is important, because our students are so competitive with each other. They really would not share advantages that they perceive because they want to do better than others. So the idea of finding lessons and inspiration and success in modeling on the success of others, if you like. So if others have done well, congratulate them, enjoy their success. And yes, you can learn from them instead of really feeling angry and put down and threatened by the success of others. And that speaks to all levels of our system. Even in a friend system, I think it's important. So those are the categories that I was speaking about when I asked about categories, but I can see that many of you have got them by inference. So you were all right in a way, and I like that you all discovered. I didn't tell you that you could upvote and downvote, but you immediately figured it out. That's how intuitive screen learning is these days, right? Okay, let me get back to these. So now I'm going to ask you, because we now know that we're not accepting right or wrong answers as no answers. Think about your week, the last week. Yes, Anastasia. So I did. Yeah, that is something that we have spoken about. That what the experts say is we oscillate between mindsets all the time. So a mindset is momentary, actually. So you could develop a mindset over an activity, but you could start an activity with a growth mindset and end up with a fixed mindset, or vice versa. So there are very, very often times when we will, over certain behaviors, vacillate. So there's no such thing as having a growth mindset. You just always do. You might have a real growth mindset at work, but come home and have a very fixed mindset. And the opposite might be true. You know, you're perfect with your home and your family, but when you get to work, you just want things to run the way you want them to run. So there's definitely this concept of oscillation between the mindsets. So now I'm asking you something personal. However, you are anonymous. So unless you tell me your department and the actual circumstance, I won't know who you are. I want to know if you can sort back on the week that you've had. Doesn't have to be this week, it could be the week before that. And submit for me some time where you thought that you had moved in quite a fixed mindset way. I can tell you now that I get a fixed mindset over marking. There are some people who are so enthusiastic to open marking and see what their students have written and see how they engaged with the question that you set. And I sometimes feel so disheartened when I mark. And so when I approach the marking, I often approach it with a very fixed mindset of, oh gosh, what have we got here? Um, and yeah, it's important, I think, to put yourself in a good environment and to, yes, develop the positive mindset about it. Still requires the same amount of effort, I think. I'm giving you time to think about it because it's quite a hard ask. Is it hard to identify your fixed mindset thoughts? Yes, Anastasia. We're supposed to be workshopping today, so that's why I'm inviting responses. Yeah. Okay. It is entirely possible to get irritated, especially in dealing with colleagues. That's interesting. So also debriefing why a third of the class would need an extension. So what's going on in the class, even though two-thirds of them are doing? I like that. Caught myself in a this is how we've always done it moment. That is absolutely true. Response to a plan of action in a research group. Do you want to expand on that? Why is that it was a fixed mindset response? Yeah. So it's so interesting. The majority of these are about dealing with colleagues or students, right? Okay. That is exactly what I'm saying. Here we are desperately trying to have that space and be mindful about our responses and think of a growth mindset response. And then we get home and we just let everybody have it. Yeah. And what does it say about our ability to build relationships when we respond often with a fixed mindset? Because in relationships we do criticize. We criticize children and we criticize partners and we we criticize colleagues, and sometimes it's really important to actually out the growth mindset. Say, I know it looks like we're having this critical whinge, but how could we use this feedback to really develop something positive? How could we approach this so that not next time, this time we take something positive out of this event? So I'm still thinking about the 8 students who wanted the extension. How does one approach that without being judgmental and also without being completely irritated? Okay. Need to think about what screen I'm in here. I'm developing such a growth mindset here, people. I'm working with all these screens. Okay. So think about what you said. And what you can do is you can either say, what would a growth mindset approach to that situation be? So how could you flip it around? Or you can give me a growth mindset moment. You can tell me in the last week how you responded with all of those things. You rose to the challenge, you got over obstacles, you made huge efforts, you responded well to criticism, and you were so happy with others' success. Matty. Yeah, we can make it very personal. We really can. But the approach of a mindset is that as long as we're conscious, we are making these responses and we are assessing the situation around us all the time. And because of that, it's this fluid thing where we choose what it is we say and how we act. So you can either take the situation that you wrote about in the fixed mindset, or you can just give me one of your growth mindset moments for the week. Christine, I know what yours could be. You dealt with a fuddy-duddy lecturer who didn't know whether to give you templates or content. With a smile. Yeah. So now that is a huge challenge, loosening the reins, encouraging others to take the lead. I've been working on this concept of collaborative leadership, and it's fascinating to me how some people in my team have come to me and said, I want a firmer hand. I want you to tell me what to do instead of this business of sitting around and setting targets and um, collaborating in the discussion. And that's fascinating for me because it's not often that you really find that. And maybe it is because work is a situation where you come and you tick it off. And maybe we need to work on mindset rather than collaborative leadership. Yeah. I like that. Still too annoyed to do that at the moment. So acknowledge it. Yes, own it. Um, and I agree. A feedback session is probably very useful, but not in a merely accusatory way. We would have to be positive about it. And yes, maybe give them another chance. Wow, that's a really interesting one. So providing a support system far away from home because of refusal. So you're trying to get around their fixed mindset by giving other alternatives, but it certainly takes a lot of effort on your part, and that's dealing with a definite challenge and an obstacle to your program. So that's very definitely growth mindset approach. Oh, wow. I really like that. Reflecting on the video. And yes, we do have to give students choice. You know, we're dealing with this whole concept of inclusivity and diversity, and those are not just words. We really have to be flexible enough to give people the opportunities. And that's not just giving them a free pass, it's about allowing them to feel participatory and rising to the challenge, but within the boundaries of what works for them. And that's a very definite growth mindset approach to design, because not everybody can do what you imagine they should be able to do. Yeah, it's hard not to criticize others when they're criticizing everything. And yeah, developing boundaries. Developing boundaries is a very growth mindset activity, because it negates the fixed mindset of there's nothing I can do about this. If you don't have boundaries, you become the victim. Oh, all right, I have to do it because nobody else will. And this is just the work that there is, and I just have to get through it. So developing boundaries helps you to develop that growth mindset. And it's amazing that you can actually acknowledge that, because it's a very hard thing to acknowledge. It's like nobody can do what I do. And that's actually not true, as we find to our great detriment. So it's important to maintain your sense of personhood and your mindfulness of the space in developing that boundary. Yeah, Anastasia, I didn't give an up and down vote on this one. I like this. A helpless and passive colleague. How many of those do we have? Really? And maybe challenge them. Yeah. But make them understand that their approach to challenge is actually important. It's not just another thing to tick off. So now we're dealing from the labeling to the process. Why would it be important to help them to challenge somebody else? Okay, so are we seeing now that it actually is pretty darn difficult to move from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset? Like me jumping between my screens. I'm doing this, and I know very well that you can embed poll everywhere in PowerPoint, but I wanted to have them on two different screens, so that I can see what's going on instead of you just being able to see the slides, right? I guess the growth mindset approach is, Christine, next time we do this, I'm going to practice in advance so that I don't have to jump from screen to screen. But thank you for participating. I think it really does help, especially when you hide behind your screen. So if you've got a class and you do want them to participate and you ask a question and two people answer in the chat, it makes it quite hard, because you're also hidden. And I think that in developing strength in this community, that we are trusting each other, I think it allows us that strength to be able to participate. And yes, making it anonymous, I think, helps too. So here's some more examples. We did do some a couple of weeks ago, thinking about the kinds of ways that people respond. I'm talking about now students. So say the ones who failed the test, if we're looking at it, we think you tried your hardest and that's all you can do. So you're never actually going to be able to do better than that. And I've said before, we've had students who spent hours and hours learning stuff off by heart, without understanding any of it. And so when it comes to the test, they fail it badly. And when you call them in and speak to them, they say, but I really learned. I learned so hard. And they'll often tell you time. It took me 4 days to learn this. And you're going, okay, that's not the point. The point is, how much of it did you understand? And what can you do with what you learned? Because that's what the test is going to ask, rather than these straight recall things that got them where they are now. Because most of our students got into the degree that they're in because of their ability to recall. And a lot of that is the way that kind of matric molds them, all of the matrics. And so when they come to not manage something, they just think, well, I'm never going to manage because look how hard I tried, but I still didn't get anywhere. It's about positive effort. So effort in the right direction. So growth mindset approach to those kind of students is really to calm them down. Don't worry if you don't understand everything right away, but you do have to make a plan. If you don't get it the first time or the second time, what are you going to do? Did you read the textbook? Did that not help you? Okay, well then maybe we should go to YouTube and see if there's something on the Khan Academy that can help you. Okay, that didn't help you. Well, maybe you should make an appointment with a tutor or speak to the lecturer and ask direct questions. You know, there are lots of alternatives that they can work on without being told you're never going to get it. Okay, just leave that section. I can't tell you how many students left out neuro because they just could pass on everything else. Okay. Our next possibility is, well, it's just a function of trying. So if you just keep trying, you're actually going to get there. And that's also not positive encouragement, even in terms of encouraging effort, because keep trying without changing anything is actually not going to move people forward. And I think we are guilty of that sometimes too. Yeah, Matty, it is what it is. uh, I like this idea of you can't tell people just to keep trying, because that for me is like this concept that we have of academic development tutorials. If you fail, you've got to go to extra tutorials. So what's the problem with that? The problem is the failing students don't have the time anyway, because they're so stressed and it takes them longer to learn. So having to sit longer in class is not going to help, number one. Number two, the ADP people are often the lecturer of the course. So they'll give an extra tut, but they were the ones who explained it in the first place, that the student didn't understand. So going to an extra tut by that lecturer is actually not helpful. And the third thing is they use the same material. So maybe even the same slides, but certainly the same textbook or the same reference that you got in class. And that also doesn't help the students see it from a different way. So in my book, remediation is something different. If the student didn't get it, then either we have to supply a different way, which is the scaffold, or if they're senior students, they have to think of a different way of how they can approach the material so that they can think about it differently, so that maybe then they'll get it. And that's very challenging. I've yet to see a program so far that does something different with students when they fail. And repeating a year for me is just, if you think about it, why do we expect that they're going to be able to pass if they just do it all over again? And so maybe what we expect, and Kennedy, I'm not preempting your research, but if that they've got more time to spend on it because they're not repeating all subjects, or, Anastasia, I'll get to you in a minute, or if their home circumstance has changed so that they're then able to succeed. If other things change, I think it makes a difference. But certainly us just repeating the material again is making a difference. Anastasia, go ahead.
Thanks, Shia. I totally agree with you. Around the whole concept of remediation, it needs to be done with lots of scaffolding and lots of thinking and reflecting on what went wrong the first time, as opposed to doing things the same way again. And we're still working on it within the Nelson Mandela Fidel Castro program. But we did a little bit of research, not a little bit, we did a research, a qualitative study, and working on the outcome from those results, yet to be published though. We're trying to provide a scaffolding around how how to ensure that remediation is successful. But the challenge is what you've rightly alluded to, the fact that from a facilitator or from an educator's perspective, the results are different. And I guess that's the next level of research. The results are different. You have certain students within certain disciplines doing better, and then you have the same results coming through with certain, and so at that point, I guess it's more of looking at where is the mindset for both the students, and the concept of, for a student who is failing and not having enough time, because that came through, and also from the side of an educator who is reflexive and able to evaluate, how do I do this differently for this student in an individual manner that produces a result that will be different. So thank you.
That's great, Anastasia, and thanks for the input, because that is the thought. The growth mindset approach is to think of the scaffold. How can we help the student to think differently about what it is that they're doing? And yeah, it's a big challenge. And I think that a lot of educators just try and get over it because they don't have time, and they're also approaching it with a fixed mindset. Let's look at the last one. And we all do this. We think we're giving positive feedback when we say, great job, thumbs up, well done. Yeah, that's useful. But the inference is you did well because you're capable. So in other words, you did well because you're intellectually able to do this thing. And also, it then implies that your smartness is innate. So you're in this program because you're clever, and because you scored well in certain areas. And that's not really what we want people to be able to do, because the truth is there's no one right answer to life. Okay, so if we want them to go out there and to be flexible and energetic and motivated and to take the time between the situation and the response, we have to try and scaffold our response too. Yes, great job. Don't deny that. Fantastic. Praise is wonderful. People really glow. But then identify what helped them to succeed. So in this case, they say, like, your study plan helped a lot, or I can see that you really understood the ways that you were learning, or the mind maps that you made really worked out, or whatever it is. Or if you don't know, so great job, students. Now, can you write down 3 things that helped you to achieve your success? And then pair them up and see if people are doing the same things. Or if a student is not doing well, what are these things that the other students did that you might be able to share with them? So use everything really as a learning opportunity, because giving praise for activities, for the process, I think is more important than the endpoint. Yeah. Anastasia, yeah. The universe is conspiring. We do say that, right? Okay. So now I'm doing not a great teacher moment. Definitely not. Whoops. Sorry. I was on that. Um, let's get to this one here. Struck out. Okay. So 10 good strategies. In any class, this is not specifically for higher education, but they speak about all groups of people. And we're looking at using this, say, in a small group interaction or in a clinical interaction or in ways that you set projects and learning activities for your student. And that's exactly the last point that we started on, which is don't praise how clever the student is. Praise the effort, but praise the successful effort, not the unsuccessful effort. Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Fantastic. There we go. And the flip side of this, they're saying, is you need to think about using diverse teaching strategies. And we made the point earlier that students have different strengths and they see things differently if you do things differently. So you can flip between um, making them do things and giving them the scaffold to work on it, or presenting and then allowing them to critique backwards and learn that way. There is no kind of one way that you need to do something. And I'm suggesting, I know I have lecturers who say, I update my material every single year and I go and find the latest stuff and I never present the same thing twice. Okay, I like that with regard to content, but what about process? Do you always give a lecture every year? Do you not try something different? So we'll say over the course of these 3 weeks, we showed videos in the first week. We used a Padlet in the second week. We used Poll Everywhere in the third week. So it's small, I admit. It's not a huge departure from the way that we're teaching, which is online. However, it's allowing different people to participate differently. And if I was really worried about the class and needing to get results, so then I would have tracked over those 3 weeks which students responded to what, and hopefully we'd get coverage over the whole class. And if not, then it's a chance to look at the process again. But but the idea that people think it's a good thing that they just updated their content without thinking about the structure of the learning experience is something that we need to work on. I know kids are never just kids. Your kid is 5 going on 25, right?
She is the smartest, most genius child in the world. And most growth mindseted.
There you go. Nothing to do with her parents, right?
No, her epicness comes from her parents as well. But the parenting's also been good.
Okay, so now they're moving into some areas which I think are challengeable. So, and here we are. So teaching the values of challenges. So if students understand why it is you want them to persevere, then you've got a better chance of them actually doing it. So, I mean, it's obviously not my area, but the idea of deliberate practice in, for example, learning a clinical skill, it's not good enough to say practice because they may be practicing the wrong thing. So the first thing is understanding that you have all the points that you need, and then working on deliberate practice, which is refining the technique. So trying different things in order to reach the same results and a better one at that. And students only understand that when, well, students will only engage in that kind of behavior when they understand that the point is really mastery. So you will not get out of this class until you can all do it 100%. There's no such thing as 80% CPR or whatever. So I think that giving reasons is often really motivating for students. And then part of the motivation discussion they have here is the idea of very simple gamification elements. So I'm treading very nervously around that one because gamification is often about self-motivation. So bettering your own score or bettering your own time, both are metrics which you can use competitively. And sometimes when you use those kinds of elements, then people try shortcuts in order to achieve higher goals or scores or shorter times. And that's not what we're trying to encourage. We're trying to encourage the effort and the amount of positive energy that they put into achieving the things you want them to achieve. So, for example, maths problems or Sudoku or spelling or all of those things, um, that's fine. because there's a right answer and a wrong answer. But for us, the idea of gamification, in other words, scoring for behaviors, I'm not that keen about. So I'm happy to take discussion about that. But I can see why on a one-on-one level, it's easy. And I'm sure some of you have used, for example, Kahoot in the classroom. Making games really encourages people to think that they're having fun rather than direct learning. So, I mean, there are lots of elements of games too, and levels. Yeah. So, Anastasia, it is a lot about the addiction of the screen also. So it doesn't have to be a screen game. Uh, in other words, how many thumbs up did you get? How many likes did you get? How many points did you get when you're doing something? Um, and also for me, sometimes it underscores for students that you have to be the best. So you have to be at the absolute top because you want to win the game. And as we all know, it's about playing the game and not winning the game, right? So that for me is a real challenge. And a growth mindset activity would be to discuss with each other kind of how that works. All right, I did leave the infographic details in so that you can go and get it yourselves, but I will obviously also share these slides with you. So this is one I really liked, which is, Anastasia, yes, before I carry on. Are you finding your
Yes.
unmute button?
Yeah, I'm trying to switch between screens. So I was just going to ask, and maybe you covered this already in the other sessions. When you have to deal with someone who is neurodiverse or neurotypical, how do you
Yeah.
put those obviously psychological states of learning and engaging with the world into context with dealing with a growth mindset or a fixed mindset? Because if someone is um yeah, if that is a way of life for someone where change becomes an issue in itself and has to be gradually entered into, I guess that is for special education. But um, we also do have certain instances where students are borderline in their personality. Thank you.
Yes, neurodiversity is enormously interesting. Matty, do you want to weigh in on this discussion?
Yes, I mean, this obviously is in my wheelhouse a
Yes.
little. So we have a neurodiverse first year student. And the interesting thing is our expectation of people specifically on the autism spectrum disorder is that they are rigid and that they have limited I don't want to use the word capacity, but for want of a better word, capacity to think outside of the box and to solve problems creatively, because they can tend to be relatively fixed in the way in which they approach life, just like Anastasia has said. But this student specifically, before she came to study occupational therapy. Now, in the first place, she's coming to study occupational therapy, which already shows a growth mindset. But in the second place, before she did that, she actually was able to use the patternistic way of thinking that people, specifically people with autism spectrum disorder, display, and capitalizing on the strength of that, rather than saying this is a weakness, you can't think outside of the box. She used that pattern-based thinking of theirs to teach them a new skill of computer programming. And they did brilliantly. So, I mean, I'm just freaking out about this because occupational therapists would typically go into creative art, crafts and whatever. And actually for these people, it would have been wrong. And asking the person with the neurodiversity or atypical neurodiversity herself made the world of a difference for herself and for the people with whom she was working.
Sure, Matty, that's a really positive story. Anastasia, does that help you?
A lot, besides the fact that my
Okay, you hit mute again. Microphone issues. All right, we'll have a growth mindset about it and have a look at the next one, which is one that I really like, and it speaks to encouraging students to expand their answers. So instead of saying when you ask the question, and we all guilty of doing this. We say it's Socratic, you see. We stand in front of the class and we ask a question and we say, and on all those lecture evaluations, it says, does the lecturer encourage participation of the class? And if you had asked a question, then you can tick yes, you did. And what's the problem with that? Yeah, you have some engaged students, 99% of them won't answer you. And if you do get an answer, you go, yes, that's right, and you carry on. Number one, or number two, even worse, I've sat through many lectures where the lecturer does ask questions and then answers it themselves. And even if the student does give an answer, then they give their own answer still, which really implies that it's a one-way traffic, doesn't it? So encouraging students to expand their answers, I think, is one of the ways that they can develop their own understanding, but also to see if they understand what it is they're saying. It's about this concept, for those of you that are into learning theory, about elaborated code. So can the student make the connections to show that they really do understand the concept? And that helps them to develop a growth mindset, because you're challenging and you're giving feedback, but you're allowing them to build the connections, which I think is good. Now, we have touched on this a little bit too, and that's talking about explaining the purposes of specifically abstract skills and concepts. Because for concrete things, then people understand why they're doing what they're doing. You know, if you're going to build a bridge with rope across a river, well, okay, let's get into it and make sure that it's secure. But if you're asking them to do something abstract, it's important to explain why you're doing it. I'm going to go through the last few just to say that each one of them is a discussion. So I like this one, a time for goal-based journaling, not just how do you feel. So we're not just sharing, but journaling, talking about your purposes. So what's your great big hairy audacious goal? That's Ray Dalio. So your big hairy audacious goal is the huge thing, but then what are the steps that you need to take to put yourself in line for being able to achieve that goal? So working backwards with steps and then developing that into a goal-based journal could be interesting. I like the saying yet more often. So particularly in the first part of this series, we spoke about the difference between yet and not yet. And the whole concept of yet allows students the hope that they will eventually get there. Oh, yes, Anastasia, sorry about that. I agree. The WITS Wi-Fi is marging on the horrendous, and that is maybe a fixed mindset approach, because what can we do about it? Complain again. Shall we organize a petition and say yet? Maybe they'll get there. So not yes, you did it, not yes, but yet you got there, as opposed to not yet. Helping students change their language is also important. So you need to model the concept of a growth mindset. So if they say, I can't do this, I'm never going to be able to do it, you can go, hang on, what's a growth mindset approach to this? You're struggling. Why are you struggling? What is it that we can help you with in terms of structuring how you get through this? And now say, I can't do it yet, but I will be able to do it if I do those things that you've helped me with doing. And just taking, that's less than 10 seconds of the student's time, may help them to change that attitude, because that's a pervasive attitude. If they don't get it straight away, or if they take longer than their friends to get something, then they get frustrated with themselves, and often they'll just check out. They'll stop listening. And then I like this idea. I'm thinking about how we could institute it really in postgrad work as well. But the idea of using a success folder. So when you get to a milestone, you can physically file that, or virtually file it, or electronically file it, or whatever. But showing that at one point you couldn't do something, and then after a period of time or practice or energy, then you could do it. And to some extent, that's the thinking behind a logbook. So when students come into an environment and they're unfamiliar with it, and then over the course of time they do actions and they are part of the, legitimate peripheral participants in the arena, and then they have developed some skills. So it's quite interesting to get the student to journal their approach from their first day in a new ward to having been there for 6 weeks, and what they now know. And it can be something as simple as where the tea room is and that they never have sugar, so you've got to bring your own. Or, at what time in the morning do they usually clean the floor, so you shouldn't be walking over it when it's wet. Those kinds of things are also important in developing like how it is that you are in the world. So being and becoming the professional that we want them to be. And so I really think that documenting that success is useful for people. It's the classic thing of these are power skills which you don't get marks for, so I'm not going to notice when they're happening. But it's the real world thing of how do you function positively in the environment, and those are the things that help you really function in that environment. So I'm going to stop there. You will see when I share the slides that there are a few more on leadership specifically, which is also using language to assist people with being able to make choices and to accept the challenge and to make the effort and to take criticism in the way that you intend it, and also to valorize success of others in a sense that you can really be motivated by that. And I'm going to leave us there for this afternoon. Thank you for joining, even though you're all pitching your tents tonight in the backyard and enjoying the public holiday. And I hope you have a really good afternoon. Thanks for joining us, guys. I am going to drop the slides in the chat, and well, I'll send them to Christine and she can share with the chat. At any stage you can log in and pick them up. Thanks, Stuart. Growth mindset. Clap hands. That wasn't good job, right? That was super, guys. Enjoy the afternoon. Cheers.